السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So inshallah, following on from last week's lesson, in which we finished the tafsir of Surah Quraysh, but then we also went on to another topic, which was the ordering of the surahs of the Quran. I wanted to actually go on from there to another topic which is closely related, and it is something which we come across very often in this class, because it's something which we have to go over a number of times, and that is at the beginning of every surah. One of the issues that we look at, and one of the points that we constantly make, is whether the surah or the chapter is Makki or Madani, whether it's a chapter that is defined or categorized as being a Makki surah or a Madani surah. And what I wanted to do, I think last year in QP we went over this very briefly, from what I remember and what I asked some of you guys and you told me, is that we went over this very briefly, but I wanted to go over it in more detail today as part of our going into the principles of tafsir and some of the sciences of the Quran, and also because it's something which pertains obviously very much to the day-to-day tafsir that we do. So categorizing a surah as being Makki or Madani is one of the most common things that we will do at the beginning of every surah. It's one of the most consistent and regular issues that we will speak about. Is the surah Makki or is it Madani? And what does that actually refer to, and what does that mean, and what are the principles that we can derive in this chapter that we can then use as a basis for how we deal with what is Makki and Madani. And what I wanted to begin with actually was how this developed as a science. So it is one of the sciences of the Quran, and like all of the sciences of the Quran, and in fact every science in Islam, they all ultimately go back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet ﷺ is the one who mentions this, he's the one who teaches this, he's the one who instills this within his companions. And the companions, even though they're not codified in that way, they're not called subjects like tafsir and fiqh and aqidah and the science of Makki and Madani and so on, or this particular chapter, it is something which the companions took from the Prophet ﷺ. And the reason why we know they took that from the Prophet ﷺ is because it is something which they discuss, and it's something which they paid attention to, and it's something which they allude to, and we have narrations from them that have been established on them that speak about these different aspects of our religion. And they will later on become codified in sciences in and of themselves. But before that time, in the time of the companions radiallahu anhum ajma'in, these are issues that they refer to and issues that they allude to. So for example, when it comes to this particular science of what is Makki and Madani from the sciences of the Quran, or this particular chapter of being Makki and Madani, and I think it is a science within itself, because it has principles, number one, and because, as we will discuss, there were scholars who dedicated works and books just to this particular study, this field of study. Not to mention that it's something which is obviously regularly mentioned in other books as well, and within the books of tafsir generally. So in the time of the companions, it's something which they paid attention to, therefore. For example, Umar radiallahu an, in the famous hadith that is in Sahih al-Bukhari, when the Jewish man came to Umar radiallahu an, and he said to him, "O Umar, there is a verse in the Quran, were it to have revealed to us," meaning the Jewish community, "we would have taken that day as a day of Eid and celebration, a day of festivity." Umar asked the man, "What is that verse?" And he replied, the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-islam deena." Today I have completed your religion for you, perfected my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your way of life. Umar radiallahu anhu said, and this hadith is in al-Bukhari, "I know by Allah, when that verse was revealed, it was revealed on the day during the farewell Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." So therefore, what is Umar radiallahu anhu doing with this verse? He's categorizing it in two ways. Number one, he's giving its location, when it was revealed, where it was revealed, and number two, a time frame. He's giving us a time frame. When in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ was this verse revealed? And so that shows that the companions, one of the things that they would pay attention to when Quran was revealed, when verses and surahs of the Quran were revealed, one of the things that they would pay attention to is where and when it was revealed. So it wasn't just that they learned the Quran, that they memorized the Quran, that they understood the meanings of the Quran, that they applied the teachings of the Quran, but they would remember and they would pay attention to and they would notice when was it revealed, and where was it revealed, and why was it revealed, and who was it revealed concerning, if for example it was revealed concerning an individual or a group of people or a tribe or a nation and so on. So therefore this is something which the companions pay attention to, as is demonstrated in this narration of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu. And that's why Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu said in the famous statement that he has, that it's also collected in Sahih al-Bukhari. Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu says that there is not a single verse of the Quran in the book of Allah except that I know where it was revealed. Except that I know where it was revealed. So Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu is saying that there's not a verse of the Quran except that he remembers when and where it was revealed. Right? And that's him basically categorizing for us the Quran, right? Telling us what is before Hijrah or post Hijrah, or revealed in Mecca and in its precincts, or revealed in Medina and in its precincts or surrounding areas. And so therefore these are the companions, especially those companions who are known to be what? From the ulama of the Quran, from the scholars of the Quran, right? From the specialists of Quran. Because we know from amongst the companions, there are those companions who are specializing in the Quran, in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Ubay ibn Ka'ab, like Zayd ibn Thabit, like Abdullah ibn Abbas, like the four khulafa, like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. They are specializing in the Quran. Aisha radiyallahu anha is another example. So these are companions who are specializing in the Quran, the tafsir of the Quran, the sciences of the Quran, right? The book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, when they then say a statement like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's, that they pay attention to where and when a verse of the Quran is revealed, it shows therefore that it's something which is important to them. There's another statement of Ali radiyallahu an that is collected in the tafsir of Abdul Razzaq, tafsir Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani. Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani is one of the old scholars of Islam. He's from the 3rd century, so he passed away in 200 and something. And therefore, and he's from the teachers of the likes of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah and others. So Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani has a tafsir which a few years ago was edited and it was published and so on. It's considered from the old tafasir of the Quran. Here's a statement from Ali radiyallahu an, that Ali radiyallahu an said during his khilafah, I think, he said, "Ask me, for by Allah you will not ask me concerning anything that will happen from now until the day of judgment, except that I will tell you about it. And ask me concerning the book of Allah, for by Allah there is not a single verse of the Quran except that I know, was it revealed by day or was it revealed at night? Was it revealed in a high area, meaning an elevated area like a mountain, or was it revealed in a valley?" So he's saying that I remember when and where, even to the portion of the day, night or day, when that verse was revealed and where it was revealed, right? And that shows therefore that the companions, their knowledge of the Quran wasn't just a superficial knowledge. It wasn't just facts and book knowledge. It was something which they lived, they experienced, and that's why their understanding of the Quran and their tafsir of the Quran and their explanation of the Quran is something which we obviously consider to be the correct meaning and understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also therefore you have all of those statements, as we mentioned at the beginning of every surah, that the companions used to comment on when and where a verse or a surah was revealed, right? Whether it's Makki or Madani. So Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Zayd ibn Thabit, Ubay ibn Ka'ab, Aisha, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in, and others from amongst the companions. When we come to, for example, the tafsir of Surah Fil or Quraysh or whatever, at the beginning I say, there's narrations from Ibn Abbas that he said that it is a Makki surah or that it's a Madani surah, whatever it may be. And that's an important point, because one of the questions or one of the principles of tafsir is that therefore most of this isn't in an authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ didn't sit there and say Surah Fatiha is Makki, or Surah Baqarah is Madani, or Surah Quraysh is Makki and Surah Nasr is Madani. He didn't say that. But this is knowledge that's taken from the companions. So when it's taken from the companions, especially in the tafsir of the Quran, like with the rest of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is knowledge that we consider to be, right? It's like proof. It's like it has the same same level of being evidence of what it is. Right? It is hujjah, it is evidence, it is proof because of the statements of the companions. And the companions, because of their knowledge, because of their virtue, because of their wisdom, their understanding, when they commented on the Quran, they did it from knowledge. They wouldn't speak about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from desires or from ignorance. It would be based upon knowledge. So therefore, in the time of the companions, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, this is one of the sciences that the companions used to focus on. And therefore, it's something which they passed on to their students. So you have, for example, in the narrations of Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, when he comments on a surah and he says, is it Makki or Madani? One of the things that you will find is that Mujahid relates this from him, his student. He narrates these narrations from him. And Ikrima, and Ata, and others from amongst the students of the companions, they are the ones who narrate this. So Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma never wrote a book on tafsir or on the sciences of the Quran. It's something which his students have memorized and taken from him, and they have then relayed to those who have come after them. So in the time of the tabi'een, the students of the companions and that generation, it is something which we find mentioned in the books that came later on, that they refer to and allude to books that were authored by the tabi'een in this very subject. The Makki and Madani, meaning standalone books, right? And that's actually something rare, because if you think about fiqh and you think about even like other sciences of the Quran, of Islam, it's not something which is authored in until many years later, right? Generations later, centuries later. It's not something which is done in the early part of Islam. But from the sciences of the Quran, the Makki and Madani, right, and some of the other sciences, they are mentioned from the beginning of Islam. There's something which the scholars authored in from the time of the tabi'een. So for example, there is a book by Al-Dhahhak. Right? Dhahhak is the famous scholar of tafsir that we often refer to and allude to. He's the one that we often mention when we speak about the tafsir of the Quran. He has a book that is attributed to him called Nuzulul Quran, the revelation of the Quran. And Al-Dhahhak died in the year 104 Hijri. Right, so he's very early on. This is like very early on. If you think about Ali radiallahu anhu dies in which year? Which year did Ali radiallahu anhu die in? Nobody knows. The year 40. The year 40 Hijri, right? And Anas radiallahu anhu is one of the latest or the last companions to pass away, dies around the year 97, 98 Hijri. Right? Abu Tufail, it said, died around the year 98. He's like the youngest companion to pass away. So Al-Dhahhak dies when? 104. Right? So 6, 7, 8 years after the last of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is very early on, right, in Islamic tradition and Islamic heritage. He has a book called Nuzul al-Quran. Ikrima, rahimahullah, the famous student of Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, has a book with the same title, Nuzul al-Quran, the revelation of the Quran, and he passed away in the year 105 Hijri. And Al-Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah, also has a book with the same title, Nuzul al-Quran, the revelation of the Quran, and he passed away in the year 110 Hijri. All three of these books, Al-Dhahhak, Ikrima, and Hasan al-Basri, their books we don't have. They've been lost. But we know that they existed because scholars refer to them in their own works. Right? So for example, Imam al-Bayhaqi, rahimahullah, in his famous book, his large book, Dalail al-Nubuwah, he has a chapter in which he speaks about Makki and Madani, and he often quotes from the books of Ikrima and Al-Hasan al-Basri when he's referring to this particular issue. So therefore, there are scholars who came later on, and they are referring to those books and they're quoting from them and so on, but they have been lost, right? We don't have them anymore. So the earliest book that we have that speaks about the topic of Makki and Madani is the book of Al-Imam al-Zuhri, rahimahullah ta'ala. And Imam al-Zuhri passed away in the year 124 Hijri. So he's still considered from the Tabi'een, right? He's still from the generation of the Tabi'een. And Imam al-Zuhri, rahimahullah, is the famous Imam, one of the greatest scholars of his generation, one of the first people to write in the sciences of hadith, one of the first people to write books of hadith, books in tafsir, and he's one of the first scholars to actually start writing and authoring in these sciences. He has a book that was found, I think it was found in the US, in Princeton University. They had a collection of Arabic manuscripts, and one of those manuscripts that they had one of those manuscripts was, they found the book of Imam al-Zuhri. Imam al-Zuhri has two books that are attributed to him in those manuscripts. The first of them is An-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, which speaks about the abrogation, the verses that abrogate other verses of the Quran. And the second one is this one, Tanzeel al-Quran, which speaks about the Makki and Madani surah. And it's a very short book. Like both of them together are very short, like it's like 40, 50 pages. And all it is, Imam al-Zuhri saying, these are the surahs that are Makki, and then he lists them. And these are the surahs that are Madani, and then he lists them. And that's, essentially what he does in that book. And he passed away in the year 124 Hijri, rahimahullah ta'ala. And that is, and by the way, there's some, I think there's some difference of opinion as to whether it can authentically be attributed to him or not. Whether, it's something which is well known from being from Imam al-Zuhri or not. I think that's a discussion that some of the scholars have. So that's like something which is also there. One of the first books though that's written, that actually goes into detail. So Imam al-Zuhri is more or less a list. But someone who actually goes into detail and speaks about this at length as a topic is the Imam Muhammad ibn Ayyub ibn al-Daris al-Bajali, rahimahullah ta'ala, who passed away in the year 294 Hijri. And he's from the teachers of Ibn Abi Hatim, rahimahullah. Ibn Abi Hatim is the author of a famous tafsir. Tafsir Ibn Abi Hatim is also one of the earliest classical tafsirs that we find in our religion. He has a book, so his teacher Ibn al-Daris, he has a book by the name of Fada'il al-Quran وَمَا أُنزِلَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ بِمَكَّةَ وَمَا أُنزِلَ بِالْمَدِينَةِ. The virtues of the Quran, and that of the Quran which was revealed in Mecca and that which was revealed in Medina. Right? And so some of the scholars say this is the first book that we have that has come to us from the Mecca and Medini, the first full book. And others said no, Imam al-Zuhri's book came before him. That's something in terms of making this chapter, the science of the Quran, as a standalone topic. Then we have other scholars of tafsir, and most of the scholars of tafsir will allude to, or they will mention in their tafsir whether the surah is Makki or Madani. By way of narration, either they will narrate, for example, that it's reported that Ikrimah said, or Mujahid said, or Abdullah ibn Abbas said, or someone else said, and they will mention that the surah is Makki or Madani. Or they will go into it in more detail. And there are, most of the books of tafsir will do this, but the four that perhaps are well known for this and do this to a great deal, and they go into detail somewhat, and they actually delve into this topic, is Ibn Atiyya rahimahullah ta'ala in his tafsir. And as I said last week, inshallah ta'ala, one of the things that we want to do in QP this year is, as we go along, is to actually take some of these books and do a somewhat in-depth study, maybe just one session, one lecture, where we go into the author, we go into the tafsir, we go into the methodology used in that tafsir, so we can understand how those tafsir books work and so on. So Ibn Atiyya rahimahullah is from the scholars of Andalus, from Andalusia, from southern Spain, and he has a book called Al-Muharrar Al-Wajiz fi Tafsir Al-Kitab Al-Aziz, and his tafsir is like a very, mashallah, very good tafsir, very nice tafsir. And it is something which is, he's considered from the muhaqqiqeen in tafsir, someone who's gone through the different views and opinions of the scholars who came before, and he edited and verified and commented on that. So Ibn Atiyya rahimahullah. Number two, Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah, the famous scholar, in his book Zad al-Masir fi ilm al-Tafsir. Number three, Ibn Kathir, al-Imam Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, in his tafsir also. And number four, al-Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala in ad-Durar al-Manthur. Right, they actually go through this in detail in terms of what is Makki and Madani. But as I said, others, Al-Tabari, Al-Qurtubi, others as well, from the scholars of tafsir will allude to this science of what is Makki and what is Madani. One of the things that we'll find as we go on, and it's something which we've seen already in our class, because there are surahs of the Quran where we will say, some of the scholars said it is Makki, and some of the scholars said it is Madani. And one of the things that I want to touch upon therefore is, why is there this difference of opinion? Why can't the scholars agree that a surah is Makki or a surah is Madani? What leads to this difference of opinion? And the first reason, and perhaps the main reason, is because, as we said, there is no authentic narration from the Prophet ﷺ concerning this. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't speak about this. He wouldn't mention that a surah is Makki or a surah is Madani. So you don't have an authentic narration or a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ in this chapter. You do have statements of the companions, and sometimes those statements of the companions all agree, and sometimes they have a difference of opinion as well. And sometimes the students from the generation of the Tabi'een, they agree, and sometimes they have a difference of opinion as well, and they differ with one another. And so because of this, because it's not something which is clear cut in that way, you find that there will be differences of opinion. Number two, and this is something which will come on to as one of the principles in the science of Makki and Madani, the difference of opinion as to what it means, what it refers to. What is Makki and Madani? Right? What does it refer to? What does that terminology refer to? And there is a difference of opinion. And there are three major opinions amongst the scholars that we'll speak about. But because of that difference of opinion, you will find therefore that there is a difference amongst the scholars as to how they categorize what is Makki and what is Madani. Right? So,
just a quick question. If a surah had certain ayat that were in Mecca and certain ayat that were in Medina, is that the case? Then how would they...
We'll come to that. And if I don't, remind me. Okay. But I think it's on one of the principles that we're going to discuss. So that's like, how do you say what is Meccan and what is Madani? So for example, in Surah Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Fear the day on which you will be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of the scholars, and that's in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? And it's one of the last verses of the Quran to be revealed. Surah Baqarah is, what surah is it, Makki or Madani? Surah Al-Baqarah. I know we haven't done Surah Baqarah, but I was hoping you'd know. Madani, it's a Madani surah, right? It's a Madani surah. By the definition of what? Of it being revealed after Hijrah, not in Medina. Revealed post-Hijrah, by that definition. However, there is an authentic narration that this verse was revealed in the farewell Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ in Mina. So some of the scholars said that this verse and therefore Surah Al-Baqarah is what? Is Makki. Because they're not looking at post or pre-Hijrah, what they're looking at? They're looking at location. Where was it revealed? Right? And so because of the difference of opinion as to how you define what is Makki and Madani, you will find that the scholars differed in terms of this issue, because they have different terminologies, right? That's why it's important to understand methodology, right? To understand where those scholars are coming from, so that when they say it's Makki or Madani, we don't just lump everyone into one group, right? They're coming from a different viewpoint. Actually, what he's saying is correct by that definition, because that verse was revealed in Mina, meaning the surrounding areas of Mecca, and therefore it is revealed in Mecca. And because of the definition that he holds, it is a correct categorization of that verse and that surah. Number three, because the narrations that are mentioned, that do exist, for example, when the companions say this verse was revealed here and that verse was revealed there, they are not always clear either. They aren't always clear either as to whether that makes the whole surah Makki or Madani. Right? Just because one verse is revealed in one place doesn't mean that the whole surah was revealed in that place. Right? If you go by location, it's not the meaning. So, for example, Surah Baqarah has 286 verses. One verse being revealed in Mecca doesn't mean that the other 280 odd were also revealed in Mecca, right? So, therefore, because of this, even the narrations that we have aren't crystal clear in that sense. And I'm talking about the narrations in which the companions say, "Oh, that verse we were here, or this was happening, or that was taking place, or this incident happened, and then Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed this verse." Those types of narrations are not the comments or not the statements of the companions in which they say that this surah is Makki or that surah is Madani. Right? We're talking about actual narrations. What are some of the defining attributes of Makki or Madani? So one of the ways that we can see the differences between the two is when we look at the attributes, what makes them different. The Makki surahs generally, number one, are short in terms of the surahs are short and the verses are short as well. So they are short. Number two, they have in them a lot of emphasis. It is often in those surahs that Allah Azza wa Jal takes oaths. It is often in those surahs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives parables, gives examples, and so on and so forth. Those are the surahs in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses these different styles of eloquence often within the Quran. Number three, the verses have many stops, right? So they are short verses and they have many stops. Number four, because of that, they have a certain rhyme, right? When you read them, they end in a certain way and they have a certain rhyme. Like in many surahs of the Quran in Juz Amma, they end all in the same way, right? All with the lam, or all with a noon, or all with, so they kind of have a rhythm to them. And they focus on a number of issues. Number one is aqidah, belief, creed, establishing Allah Azza wa Jall's oneness. Number two, akhlaq, and good character, and the general things that Islam calls to in terms of virtues, in terms of being honest, in terms of having integrity, in terms of being kind and generous and merciful, all of those different characteristics that we have in our religion. And number three, stories. Stories of the prophets, stories of the past nations, and so on. Al-Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah ta'ala in his book Al-Muwafaqat, he said, and the Makki surahs generally speak about three issues. All of them come back to the same thing, and that is establishing Allah's worship. Number one, the first of those three issues is that they speak about Allah's oneness. Number two, the truthfulness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And number three, the truthfulness or the reality of the hereafter and death. Right? And all of those obviously come back to the same issue of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Madani surahs, on the other hand, are longer surahs, and they have longer verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often goes into more detail in those surahs concerning evidences that He uses against the mushrikeen and the people of the book and the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, and so on. Number three, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in those surahs goes into detail concerning rulings, the rulings of marriage and divorce and inheritance, and so on and so forth. Number four, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into detail concerning the religions of the Jews and the Christians. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number five, goes into speaking about the reality of the munafiqeen and the hypocrites. In the books of Makki and Madani, one of the things that you will find is that the scholars, and generally in some of the books of Ulum al-Quran, you will find that one of the things that the scholars did when it came to the chapter of Makki and Madani is that they tried to give what is called a dabit. Right? A dabit is like a rule. If you see something, therefore it means something else. Right? How do you recognize a Makki or Madani surah? They came up with a number of rules. If you see this, then most likely, or it is the case that surah will be Makki or Madani. So for example, from the rules that they had for the Makki surahs, is that they said that if you find the word kalla in that surah, it is a Makki surah. So the word kalla, right, like in Surah Al-Takathur, kalla law ta'lamuna ilm al-yaqeen, right? Surah Qiyamah, kalla bal rana ala qulubihim, in Surah Mutaffifin, right? And so on. Kalla, the word kalla only comes in Makki surahs, right? And this is mentioned by Imam al-Zarkashi, rahimahullah, and Imam al-Suyuti. Imam al-Zarkashi is the author of the book Burhan fi Ulum al-Quran, right? It's a book on the sciences of the Quran. And Imam al-Suyuti is the famous Imam. Al-Suyuti has the large tafsir that we mentioned, and then he has the small tafsir which is called Tafsirul Jalalain, right? One of the two, his name is Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, and he has books on Ulum al-Quran. He has a book called Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. So these two scholars, al-Zarkashi and Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah, Imam al-Suyuti passed away in 911, I think, or 913 Hijri, and al-Zarkashi 794 Hijri. So those scholars, they have these books, and both of them mention this. In fact, everything that I will say more or less is mentioned by both of them in their books in Ulum al-Quran. So the word kalla, if it is found in a surah, it is a Makki surah. They also said, and this is mentioned by a number of scholars, that the word Ya ayyuhan nas, what does Ya ayyuhan nas mean? No. O people, right? O mankind. Right? Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu is O you who believe. Ya ayyuhan nas is O mankind, O people. This is an address that is only found in the Makki surahs. Right? That's what they said. And actually, on reflection, as other scholars have mentioned, these rules are not comprehensive. They're not universal. There are exceptions to them. So it is the case that, yes, Ya ayyuhan nas is generally mentioned in surahs which are Makki. But that's not always the case. Because Ya ayyuhan nas is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, right? And in Surah Al-Nisa, in Surah Al-Hajj. And these are Madani surahs, right? And that's why Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and Imam Al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, they said that this rule isn't correct as a universal rule, but rather it's the majority, right? And actually most of these rules are majority based. They're not comprehensive, they're not universal. There are exceptions to them. So that's the second one, Ya ayyuhan nas. Number three, every surah in which there is a sajda, meaning a prostration, when you prostrate for recitation, is a Makki surah. And this was mentioned by Imam al-Hudhari, with the exception of Surah Hajj. And Surah Hajj is a surah which the scholars differ over, is it Makki or Madani? Right? So if you say it's Makki, then there's no exception. If you say it's Madani, then it is an exception. So every surah in which there is a sajda to tilawa, a prostration for recitation, when you recite a verse of the Quran and you make sajda, it is a Makki surah. Number 4, every surah that begins with al-huruf al-muqatta'a or huruf al-hijab, which means what?
The letters that no one knows the meaning of.
Yeah, the letters that no one knows the meaning of, it is a Makki surah. Like for example, Yasin, Noon, Qaf, Hamim, with the exception of 2 surahs. Which 2 surahs?
So if it's huruf al-muqatta'at, then it's...
If it has those letters at the beginning of the surah, it is a Makki surah, with the exception of 2 surahs. Baqarah and Al-Imran. Except Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, which both begin with Alif Lam Mim, but they are an exception to the rule. Right? And this is mentioned by Shaykh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shanqiti rahimahullah ta'ala. Right? So that's generally the rule. So all of the Hameems, Ra'ad, Hud, Yusuf, all of those like surahs that begin with those letters, Taha, Maryam, Sad, and so forth and so on. They are from the Makki surahs. Number 5, every surah from the Mufassal is Makki. What is Mufassal? Remember when we did the categorization in the time of the companions, how they would categorize the Quran? They didn't have juz. They didn't categorize them in that way. They wouldn't say it's 5 juz or 10 juz. They would categorize them in the 7 long surahs, the Mathani, the Ma'in, and then they would have the Mufassal. The Mufassal is from what? From which surah? From Qaf, or some said from Hujurat, all the way to Nas. It is reported that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu said this: every surah from the Mufassal is Makki. Every surah from the Mufassal is Makki. And this is the statement from him is reported in Tabarani, by Tabarani, but it is a weak statement from him. But anyway, the scholars have taken it as a rule. However, that also is not universal. It is generally correct, like the majority. It's a majority rule. But there are exceptions to that. For example, surah. Which surah? Yeah, Fath as well.
Yeah, and then,
But Fath is before Qaf.
the other one,
The easiest one that we've done already. Surah Nasr.
Nasr.
إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ, which was revealed towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Therefore showing that rule is universal, right? It is the majority case, but there are exceptions to it as well. Number 6, are we on 6? Huh? 6. Every surah in which we have the story of Adam and Iblis is Makki except for Suratul Baqarah. And this is mentioned by Imam al-Suyuti and al-Zarkashi again as well. So every surah in which there is the story of Adam and Iblis, Surah Sad, Surah A'raf, Surah what else? Al-Hijr, Surah Al-Kahf, right? Surah Taha. When you have the mention of Adam and Iblis, it is a Makki surah with the exception of Surah Al-Baqarah. And number 7, every surah in which there are stories of the prophets is Makki with the exception of Surah Al-Baqarah. So every surah in which you have the mention of the stories of the prophets, and that doesn't mean that they just mentioned or alluded to by name or something, but it means like they actually go into detail of the stories of the prophets, then it is a Makki surah. As for the Madani surahs, then again Zarkashi and Suyuti rahimahumullah, they mention a number of rules to show what is a Madani surah. Number 1, every surah in which there is a capital punishment or there is a penal punishment or there is an obligation, it is a Madani surah. Right? So when Allah Azza wa Jal obligates something, or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about one of the punishments, it becomes a Madani surah. Number 2, every surah in which there is the mention of jihad, right, and fighting and so on, warfare, that is a Madani surah. Number 3, every surah in which the hypocrites are mentioned. And some of the scholars said, except with the exception of Surah Ankabut. Every other surah in which the hypocrites are mentioned is from the Madani surahs. And number 4, and this is something which we kind of alluded to before, every surah in which Allah Azza wa Jal begins the verse, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe, is a Madani surah. With the exception of Surah Hajj, as we said, there's a difference of opinion. If you consider it to be Makki, it's an exception. If you consider it to be Madani, then there's not an exception. And this last principle was mentioned by Ibn Atiyah in his tafsir and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala. Right, so they mention these kind of rules. Any questions before we go into the principles?
You mentioned the books by Ikrimah and Hassan al-Basri are lost. You only know they exist because other scholars mentioned them. Did anybody write like Shuruh or Mukhtasar on these books?
No. So the question is like the books of Ikrimah and Hassan and others. Didn't anyone write a commentary on them or an explanation or summarize them and so on? You'll find that generally like that's something which took place much later on. Right? So when scholars started doing shuruh and they started, that's something which came later on. And if it's anything like the book of Imam al-Zuhri, there's not much to do with sharhan because literally like a list. And it may well be that that's the case of how they did it as well. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. But it's something which, and it seems to be, Imam al-Bayhaqi, when he narrates from them in his book Dalail al-Nubuwah, when he alludes to Al-Hasan al-Basri's book and Ikrimah's book, he mentions narrations. So some of the scholars said it seems that those books were just narrations. That so-and-so Ibn Abbas said. It's just him narrating from his teachers. Ibn Abbas said this surah is Makki. Ibn Abbas said this surah is Makki. This one's Madani, and so on. So that seems to be just the case. Right? And Allah knows best. But obviously they've been lost. Like many other books that have been lost over the centuries. Okay. In the classification of listing of Madani, I didn't understand the difference between points 2 and 5. Both in the list say the Madani surahs go into detail reality regarding the munafiqeen.
So we said the first one is Makki surah is a short, then we have the second one.
Okay, yeah, I mean they're kind of similar. So one speaks about the reality of the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, and point number 2 was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala debates them. Right? So one is showing their reality, meaning that there's a group of people who are munafiqeen, even though they show iman, they conceal disbelief. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala debates them in the Quran, in like Surah Baqarah, he goes into many verses in other parts of the Quran, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into detail concerning them. That's what it means, but yeah, there is like an overlap between them. Sumayr is asking if a long surah had ayat revealed both in Mecca and Medina, on what basis did they decide if it was to be classified overall as a Makki or a Madani surah? So we're going to come on to this because what we're going to do now is go through, 7 or 8 principles on how to understand the science of Makki and Madani, what it means, yeah.
What's the reason of the prostrations in the Quran?
What are the reasons for the prostrations of the Quran? It's because the Prophet ﷺ would prostrate after reading those verses. And often in those verses, there is a command to prostrate. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a command to prostrate, and it's usually because of something that Allah Azza wa Jal commands us to show humility and humbleness to Him. The command is given, and then the Prophet ﷺ used to prostrate. And because he used to prostrate, it became a sunnah to do so.
So was that revealed by Jibreel alayhi salam, or it was just practice of the Prophet ﷺ?
Was the command? I mean, it was revelation. When the Prophet ﷺ does anything in Islam, it is revelation. So everything the Prophet ﷺ does is revelation. Anyone else? Okay. Principle number 1. Principle number 1. When we speak about Makki and Madani, and this is kind of like the question that was asked now, and Uwais asked this question as well, and so on. The first principle is that when we speak about Madani and Makki and we classify them in this way, we're speaking about the majority of a surah, not necessarily every single verse. So it is very possible that you have a Makki surah, but some of its verses were revealed Madani, right? They are Madani. And there's a Madani surah and some of its verses were Makki, right? Depending on obviously the classification and how you understand those terminologies. And we'll come on to that next in the second principle. So therefore, that is very possible. So how is it based? Therefore, the question that's asked online, if there's some verses Makki, some are Madani, what do they consider, whether it's Makki or Madani? How do they base that? They base it upon the majority. Or they base it upon where it started to be revealed. where it began its revelation, if it's a very long surah, for example. But usually it is the majority. It is the majority of the surah. Right? Where was the majority of the surah revealed? And Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala in Fath al-Bari, he said, it is not a condition that every single verse in a long surah that was revealed, it is not a condition that if a few verses were revealed in Mecca or before the Hijrah, that the surah can no longer be a Madani surah, right? And vice versa. Rather, the strong opinion is that whatever was revealed after the Hijrah is considered to be a Madani surah. So therefore, just because a few verses are revealed here or there doesn't change the general classification of the surah, whether it's Makki or whether it's Madani. Right? So it is, the first principle is what? It is based upon the majority. So it is not universal. And that's why, where you have those differences of opinion, like Surah Baqarah is a Madani surah, but that one verse was revealed in Mina during the farewell Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ and so on, that even if you go by that classification, that it's based upon location, that's how you classify Makki and Madani, even by that classification, the surah does not become Makki. Right? Even if you say it's by location. Why? Because the majority is still in Medina. So therefore it is based upon the majority, not based upon it being a universal concept, because obviously, as we know, the Quran was revealed in stages, and it was revealed at different times and in different places. The second principle is therefore, what is the correct classification of Makki and Madani? How do we understand what is Makki and Madani? And we said that there are three opinions. The first of them is by location. So whatever is revealed in Mecca and around Mecca is Makki. And whatever is revealed in Medina and around Medina is Madani. So what does Mecca and around Mecca mean? Mecca, Arafah, Mina, all of those surrounding areas of Mecca, and Medina is the same. The problem that some of the scholars raised with this definition, or with this defining the terms in this way, is what about those surahs that were revealed neither in Mecca nor in Medina? Those verses that were revealed when the Prophet was going to Tabuk, for example. Or for example, when the Prophet is traveling between Mecca and Medina, is halfway. Right? He's journeying from Mecca, he's neither in Mecca nor is it in Medina. And so some of the scholars said therefore that this terminology or this classification and understanding of Makki and Madani isn't wholesome, it's not comprehensive, because there will be surahs and verses that don't fit into either of those two categories. The second opinion is that a Makki surah is that which has the attributes of the Makki surahs, and the Madani surah is that which has the attributes of the Madani surahs. Right? So just the ones that we went through. So the Makki surahs are short and they're concise and they're whatever, and the Madani surahs are long and so on, and therefore whatever seems or has the attributes of Makki is Makki, whatever has the attributes of Madani is Madani. What's the problem with that classification?
Who made the classification?
Who made that classification?
If you're using the classification of Makki surahs, then you have to have a base to say these surahs are Makki.
Yeah, but like, what's the problem with that? Like, what makes it difficult to even apply that, even if you had a basis for it?
It's secular, that's why, because
Subjective.
Not only is it subjective, but because we obviously have examples where that doesn't work. Right? So Surah Al-Nasr is short. Right? It's 3 verses, one of the shortest surahs of the Quran, and relatively short verses, and it is a Madani surah. And then you have surahs like Surah An'am and Araf, which are long surahs. They're long surahs, they have long verses, and they are Makki surahs. Right? So it doesn't fit either way. So the one that most of the scholars liked, and the one that like generally people accept now, like all of our teachers and scholars generally accept this to be the correct classification, is the one that's mentioned by Ibn Atiyah, Al-Imam Ibn Kathir, Al-Suyuti, Ibn Hajar, Rahimahumullah, I think Ibn Taymiyyah and others, is that a Makki is what is revealed before Hijrah, and Madani is what is revealed after Hijrah. So anything revealed before Hijrah, wherever it was, in Mecca, outside of Mecca, in Ta'if, wherever it may be, it is Makki. And whatever was revealed after the Hijrah, even if it's in Mecca. So if it's after Hijrah and it's revealed in Mecca, during the farewell Hajj, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the conquest of Mecca, or it's in Tabuk, or whatever it may be, it is still classified as Madani. So the first one, right, the first definition looked at location, the second definition looked at eloquence and literature, or the literal, or the literacy, or the the eloquence of the Quran. And the third definition looks at time. Right? It looks at what is before and what is after the hijrah. So the hijrah is the defining point, right? The defining point of what becomes Makki and what becomes Madani. And that is, as we said, the one that most of the muhaqqiqeen and many of the scholars chose to be the one that we take. Everything right? Should we stop or should we carry on? Give you a minute to refresh.
Let me just check.
All right. Just give us a couple of minutes. Any questions while we're waiting for
Is there any exception to that rule?
of the Makki and Madani?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a good question. Is there any exception? You don't need an exception because it's very clear, right?
Taking very literal, right?
Yes, very literal. So anything before Hijrah is Makki, anything post Hijrah is Madani. The only slight issue is what? During the Hijrah. Where does that come? That's where the problem is, right? And I think it's Yahya ibn Salam, or one of the scholars of the past, had the opinion that anything that takes place up until after the Hijrah, up until the Prophet arrived in Medina itself, is still considered Makki. That's something which he mentioned. But I think many of the scholars say, anything that as soon as the Prophet left Mecca, it becomes Madani, even if he didn't yet arrive in Medina. Right? But that's the only one, or the only slight grey issue where the scholars didn't really give clarity in terms of where the Hijrah itself falls. But other than that, it's actually very clear, and that's one of the reasons why most of the scholars chose that, because it takes away. It doesn't look at other things. It just looks at a very, very clear-cut issue that took place in the time of the Prophet, a very clear incident, and therefore it's easy just to carry on from there. Anyone else? Any other questions?
No question. Are you doing your homework?
I Wikipedia and then nothing came up.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not surprised. What would Wikipedia have?
There must have been hadith in there somewhere.
Yeah.
We didn't say we can't use Wikipedia for this sort of like.
Come on, you're a.
Waiting for the non-Muslims.
I think that's a very interesting thing to research, though. Anyone else want to take that up? Anyone else know what we're talking about? So last week, I think, or the week before or something, one of the things that we want to look at is the Uthmani Khulafa. Are they from Quraysh or not? The Ottomans. And it's not, I don't think it's that hard to research. It can't be that difficult to find out. It's just someone has to be bothered to go and actually do it. Yeah. And some of you guys, mashallah, you work for the NHS, you work for the Department of Education, you don't really do much during the day. So I'm sure you have time to just sit there whilst people are doing homework, just but I think it's just worth.
Check, I think if we carry on and then we'll
All right.
upload the recording afterwards.
Okay. So we didn't.
Yeah.
Which one were we on?
We did the second one about
Second principle. So what's the first principle? The first principle is
the majority of the surah.
that we're speaking about majority, right? It's not universal. There will always be exceptions to the rule of Makki and Madani. Number two is that Makki and Madani, by its correct classification, is what is pre-Hijrah is Makki, what is post-Hijrah is Madani. Number three, how we determine that something is Makki or Madani, by that definition, therefore, comes back to the narrations of the companions. Comes back to the narrations of the companions, those who witnessed the revelation of the Quran. Like the examples that we mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, right? Umar said, radiyallahu anhu, that I remember when this verse was revealed, right? Or Ibn Mas'ud, if he has an opinion, or Abdullah ibn Abbas, or whatever, because why? These are the companions who were there when the Quran was being revealed. Or even if they weren't there personally, like Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma is relatively young, but they learned and they studied with the senior companions. So they would take from Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali and others from amongst the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, who understood and knew that. So when the companions say it, it has something which obviously they are the ones who determine what is Makki or Madani. The question therefore arises, if they don't say anything, and we come to the next generation of the Tabi'een, then what? Do we accept it or don't we accept it?
Well, nothing else to go by.
Yeah, okay, so we don't have anything else to go by, that's a fair point, number one. Number two is it depends. We look at what they say. If they agree, all of them said it's Makki, or all of them said it's Madani, then obviously we accept it, right? Because the Tabi'een are the students of the companions. They took their knowledge from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And if they disagree, and they have a difference of opinion, then it becomes like any other issue of ijtihad, right? It becomes like any other issue of difference of opinion that we have, like in fiqh and in hadith and other things, and we try to look at which one of the two opinions is stronger to see which one of them we would take, right? So that's principle number 3, and this principle is mentioned by An-Nahas and As-Suyuti, rahimahumullah. They mention this principle, that those who actually say Makki or Madani, they classify the surah to be Makki or Madani, are those who witnessed revelation themselves, meaning the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, like the statement of Aisha radiyallahu anha when she said, Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Nisa were not revealed until after I was married to the Prophet ﷺ, until after I moved in with the Prophet ﷺ. And she didn't move in with the Prophet ﷺ except after the Hijrah. So therefore she's saying that Baqarah and Nisa are Madani surahs. Right? Aisha radiallahu anha is making this statement. So she's qualified to make that statement. She can say that because she was there and she obviously saw that and so on. So when they say that, then we say it's Makki or Madani. Otherwise it becomes very difficult to determine, because as we said, there are surahs that have the attributes of Makki that can be Madani and vice versa, and unless the Tabi'een, and often you will find that the Tabi'een will say it is Makki or Madani. So even if there is a surah in which there is not a narration from the companions, you will find that the Tabi'een most likely have an opinion. Mujahid, Ikrimah, Ata, Al-Hasan al-Basri, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, all of those great scholars from amongst the generation of the Tabi'een, rahimahumullah ajma'een, they will often say and they will often give that verdict or that ruling of whether the surah is classified as being either Makki or Madani. The fourth principle number 4. The asl, the origin is that a surah, all of it is Makki or all of it is Madani, unless we have an authentic narration and evidence to say otherwise. So we know there are exceptions because there are authentic hadith that say that this verse is an exception. But where we don't have that hadith and we say that the surah is Makki or Madani, then the general rule is all of it is Makki or Madani, unless we know specifically otherwise by way of an authentic narration, by way of evidence. So for example, if we say Surah Ali Imran is Madani, and someone comes and says, no, but there's 5 verses that are Makki. Right? How? Why? Why do you say there's 5 verses Makki? If there's a hadith or a narration to say that, then fair enough. If not, then someone can't come and just say, oh, but those verses seem like they have attributes of the Makki, or they just seem like they're speaking about a topic that is more relevant to the Makki period, and so on and so forth. Those types of, like that kind of thing doesn't necessarily fly. So therefore it is this principle, and it's mentioned by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah and Imam al-Bayhaqi. Both of them mention this principle, that if a surah is Makki or Madani, the general ruling is that all of it is Makki or Madani, unless there is an authentic narration stating otherwise, that this verse is the exception to the rule. So for example, a verse from a Madani verse, that's an example of a Madani verse in a Makki surah, is what is mentioned in Sahih Bukhari on the authority of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. And this hadith has a narration in Al-Bazzar, the Musnad al-Bazzar, that is more explicit. But the narration of Al-Bukhari is that a man kissed a woman on a journey, and then he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he confessed. He told the Prophet ﷺ that this is the sin that he committed. And Allah Azza wa Jal revealed the verse in Surah Hud, verse 114, أقم الصلاة طرفي النهار وزلفا من الليل إن الحسنات يذهبن السيئات. Establish the prayer in the morning and the evening and during the night, for indeed good deeds extinguish evil deeds. And so the man said, O Messenger of Allah, is this for me? And the Prophet ﷺ said, this is for all of my ummah. Right? Is this for me? He said, no, it is for all of the ummah. So this hadith, why is this because Surah Hud is a Makki surah, but why do we say that this verse is a Madani? Why is it given as an example? Because in the narration or in the Musnad of Al-Bazzar, so this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim and other books, but the wording in the Musnad of Al-Bazzar is that this man was traveling in Medina, from Medina, meaning that it took place in the Madani era. The companion is traveling to Medina, back and forth from Medina. And so as he was traveling from Medina and then he returned, this took place, and then he came to the Prophet and the rest of the hadith is the same. So that additional wording is why some of the scholars said this. The Surah Hud is a Makki surah, but this verse, based upon this narration, and if that wording is authentic, that extra wording is authentic, then it is a Madani verse. Right? Yeah.
Could not be the case that it was revealed in Makkah, for example, but it's also revealed in Medina?
Is it possible that something can be revealed twice, you mean?
Yeah.
It is possible if it is mentioned like that. If it is. So like some of the scholars say, for example, Surah Fatiha was revealed twice, right? Once in Mecca and once in Medina. Or some verses revealed because there was one incident and it took place there. And that's only if there's two authentic narrations. If you have two authentic narrations, then you say that the surah, and they both seem to be in two different places, right? Two different, one's Mecca and one's Madani. Then you will say, and they're both authentic, then you will say that yes, perhaps that verse was revealed twice, right? To re-emphasize. Or the second companion didn't know that it had been revealed and it was mentioned to him, or something like that. Okay, so sorry for those of you online, we lost you for a few minutes, I think. And we'll upload inshallah the full class. It will be on the portal inshallah after we finish. We're on principle number 4. So I think you missed one principle maybe. But principle number 4 is that generally if a surah is Makki or Madani, the principle is that the whole surah is considered to be Makki or Madani unless we have an exception that is authentically narrated. It is authentically established. And we gave this example in Sahih Bukhari. What about the opposite? Right, so that's a Makki surah that is a Madani verse, right? Which makes sense because Makki comes first and Madani comes after. So it's very possible that you have a Makki surah and then you have a Madani verse that's revealed later on and added to that surah. What about the opposite? Where it's a Madani surah, can you have a Makki verse? I'm asking you to debate. I'm asking you a question. Is it possible?
Yeah, it's possible.
Is it possible? Ibn Hajar rahimahullah said it is rare if at all, like if there is even an example of this. He said it is either rare or there's no example of this. Right? And this is what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions, but if someone wants to research this and
You say Surah Hajj, there was an ayah which was Madani, but you said scholars differ whether the whole surah is Madani. I'm just trying to
yeah, so Surah Hajj, the scholars differ as to whether it's a Makki surah or a Madani surah. But the question here is that if you have a Makki surah, not a Makki surah, a Madani surah but a Makki verse, right? And again, I think this comes down to how you define it. By the definition that we're going by, it seems like it is rare. It's like how does that work? Because anything that comes after, and if the surah is Madani, right, even if the verse is revealed later on, then it's still Madani. But if it's done by location, then it's possible. Right? So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah and others said that I don't know of any example of this. Right? And I couldn't find an example when I was researching this topic either. But if someone comes across something else, then please let me know. Number 5, principle number 5. A Madani surah abrogates a Makki, or a Madani verse abrogates a Makki, and a Madani verse abrogates a Madani verse that was revealed before it. Right? So a Madani verse abrogates a Makki, and a Madani verse abrogates a Madani that was revealed before it. So for example, an example of a Makki verse, a Madani verse abrogating a Makki verse, is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Nahl, verse number 67, وَمِن ثَمَرَاتِ النَّخِيلِ وَالْعَنَابِ تَتَّخِذُونَ مِنْهُ سَكَرًا وَرِزْقًا حَسَنًا. And from the fruits of the date palm tree and grapes, you take from it a drink. Right? You take from it a drink and a provision. Right? And that's obviously speaking about wine, because wine at the beginning of Islam was permitted, was allowed. And then we have the verse in Surah Ma'idah, verse number 19, which Allah Azza wa Jal said, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوا. O you who believe, indeed alcohol and gambling and sacrificing on stone altars and divination from arrows, it is from the handiwork of shaitan, so stay away from it. Right? So that's a Makki surah or a Makki verse, and it's abrogated by a Madani verse which comes after it. An example of a Madani verse that's abrogated by another Madani verse, so a Madani verse that was revealed first, abrogated by a Madani verse that comes after, is in Surah Baqarah. In verse number 240, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَالَّذِينَ يُتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا وَصِيَّةً لِأَزْوَاجِهِمْ مَتَاعًا إِلَى الْحَوْلِ غَيْرَ إِخْرَاجٍ. These are verses that speak about a wife who loses her husband. The husband passes away, the wife becomes widowed. What is her iddah? What is her waiting period? What does she do next? So in the first verse, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, whoever from amongst you passes away, then let them leave behind a wasiyah, right? A will or a bequest, that they will provide for them for a whole year, and that they will not be made to leave from their homes, meaning the homes of their husbands. So that was initially the ruling. If the husband passes away, the wife is widowed, from his estate she is looked after for a whole year, ila al-hawl, right, for a whole year, and she stays in the home of her husband. That's abrogated by verse 234 of the same surah, Surah Baqarah, where Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَالَّذِينَ يُتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. Whoever passes away and leaves behind a wife, the wife becomes widowed. She remains in iddah for how long? 4 months and 10 days. Right? And obviously that is the ruling that then became the ruling of Islam.
Is another example not the one about being dutiful to the parents? You know, the Surah Isra, the ayah in Surah Isra, and then I think there was another surah because in Adab al-Mufrad, I can't remember, one of the Sahabis mentioned that there was that ayah, we thought it was for all of our parents, and then there was another ayah revealed which explained you can't ask for forgiveness for your parents if they're mushrikun. But that wouldn't really be an abrogation, it would be more clarification.
Yeah, it's a clarification, it's not an abrogation.
What about
Abrogation is when the whole ruling is removed.
It's in the surah entirely where it says if there's 10 of you and 20 of them, you still fight. If there's
Yeah.
Would that be an abrogation therefore? Because the numbers are changing now.
I don't know if that's necessarily an abrogation.
Because there wouldn't be a clarification because now the numbers are changing. I think it's 50 of them and X amount of you.
No, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that's what you would have done. But now Allah Azza wa Jalla has had mercy upon you, and so now you have to do less. But those verses are, I think, together. It's not abrogation is normally one verse is revealed, and then after a period of time another one is revealed. So if they're revealed together, it's more a clarification, right? It's more like clarification. An interesting thing about this example that I gave about the widow is what? I don't know how many of you noticed this. None of you are probably paying attention to this.
Stay in the husband's house.
Sorry?
The baby stay in the husband's house.
No. No, just from like a technical point of view, nothing to do with actual verse or its tafsir or anything, but in terms of what we're speaking about the Makki and Madani. Both of these verses are revealed in which surah? Surah Baqarah. And I said that verse number 1 was what number? Huh? The first verse is which number in Surah Baqarah? The first verse that I gave is verse number 240. And the second one is 234.
The abrogation came before.
What's strange about that?
The first time it's alcohol is the same, isn't it? But then even though
No,
alcohol
you're not understanding the question.
the ayah is before, so if you were to read
Yes,
the order,
yes.
it would seem as though you've now
So what is abrogated comes
before.
before, and what the ruling that is abrogated comes later. Right? And that's strange, no?
Isn't that the same with alcohol though? If you were to
Why?
Maybe in order of the ayahs, but not in order of revelation.
Yeah, so that's the principle there. So the order of verses in the Quran is not necessarily the order of the revelation. Right? And so that shows that the ordering of the verses in the Quran was something which the Prophet ﷺ did, right, by revelation of Prophet. It wasn't something, and the Quran is not ordered chronologically, neither in terms of surahs nor in terms of verses. Right? And this is one of the strongest, proofs for that. That the Quran wasn't, it's not in order, even within a surah, it's not chronological order. Right? It has a different type of order. And that's obviously for, other reasons that is not meant to be chronological. Okay. The sixth principle: what is revealed from the Madani surahs must be understood in the context of the Makki. And likewise, Makki with Makki and Madani with Madani, depending upon how it was revealed. Right? What does that mean? It means that when we have a Madani surah and we come to it, and whether it's verses, whether it's rulings, whether it's whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to us in those Madani surahs, we don't isolate them and take them away from the rest of the Quran. Right? And this is one of the biggest problems that we have when it comes to the study of tafsir today, and generally the study of the Quran and so on. And that's why the Quran is often used as like a proof for so many crazy things, right? People that like kill other people that do other crazy things. Everyone is using the Quran as their basis and their source. Why? Because what people often do is that they take the Quran, one verse, one surah, one passage, and they have it in isolation, and they ignore the rest of the Quran. And so one of the principles of the Makki and Madani is what? As this is mentioned by Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah in al-Muwafaqat, he mentions this principle. The Madani has to be understood in light of the Makki, and the Makki with the Makki and the Madani with the Madani, meaning that you don't isolate the Quran. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions one issue, ruling concerning, for example, hijab, or concerning alcohol, or concerning interest, riba, or concerning whatever it may be, we don't take that in isolation and away from the other verses of the Quran that speak about something similar. Right? And Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah gives an example of this. He says, Surah Al-Baqarah is understood in light of Surah Al-An'am, because Surah Al-An'am is Makki and it speaks about the basics of Islam. It speaks about worshipping Allah. It speaks about having the belief that is correct and so on. And Surah Al-Baqarah comes and it builds on that and it goes into more detail and it gives more proofs and so on. Right? And this is the example that Imam al-Shatibi rahimahullah gives. So therefore the Quran, you don't take Surah Baqarah in isolation, but rather the Quran is brought all together. Right? And that's why one of the methodologies of doing tafsir is what is called tafsir al-mawdu'i. Right? What is tafsir al-mawdu'i? Thematic tafsir. What does thematic tafsir mean? It means that you gather all of the verses under one theme together, wherever they may be in the Quran, and you bring them together. Like for example, the story of Musa alayhi salam, from all over the Quran you bring it together. Right? The story of Ibrahim, bring it together. The verses that speak about salah, bring them together. So now you have them all together under that theme, right? Under the theme of salah, the theme of a prophet, or the theme of the Day of Judgment, for example. Whatever it may be, you bring them together and you study them like that. Right? That's called thematic tafsir. And it used to be an Al-Maghrib class, I think. I don't know what it's called, man. I know it was thematic tafsir. What the posh title was, I don't know. The seventh principle, Al-Qa'idah al-Sabi'ah. A surah may continue to be revealed, meaning a long surah is revealed in batches, right? It's revealed in stages, and whilst it's being revealed, another surah is revealed as well. Meaning that it wasn't the case, right? And this is mentioned by Ibn Ashur, rahimahullah, in his tafsir. It's not the case that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finished the revelation of one surah and then started the next. So all of Baqarah was revealed, then all of Al Imran, then all of Nisa, then all of Ma'id, not like that. So it's very possible that Baqarah, because it's 286 verses, was revealed over a long period of time. And whilst that was taking place, Baqarah had not yet been completed, other surahs were being revealed, and some of them were being finished, and some of them like this. This is how the Quran was revealed. So the example that we have of that is Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah, it is said, was revealed, one of the first surahs to be revealed in Medina. من أول ما نزلت في المدينة. One of the first surahs to be revealed in Medina, as Ibn Kathir and Ibn Hajar mentioned. Both of them mentioned this, rahimahumullah. That is one of the first surahs. But at the same time, we know that there is a narration that the verse وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, fear the day on which you will be turned back to Allah, return to Allah, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah mentioned, was revealed after the farewell Hajj. So it's a surah that begins post-Hijrah, like literally after the Hijrah it's beginning. The farewell Hajj is like 9 years later, and still verses of Surah Al-Baqarah are being revealed. Now during that period of time, 9 years, obviously there are many other surahs that are Madani that are being revealed during that time. Right? So that's a principle also to remember. And that was the final principle actually. Principle number 7. Right? So shall I run through them again? Actually someone else run through them. So number 1 was, so the first principle is that the rulings are for, or the principles are concerning the majority of the surah. It's not a universal principle. There may be exceptions to this. Second principle.
We talk about whether something Makki Madani
What is the correct understanding and definition of Makki and Madani? And we said it is pre-Hijrah is Makki and post-Hijrah is Madani. Number 3.
of the Sahaba who received revelation are used to determine.
So what determines whether something is Makki or Madani? How do we classify this? It is based upon revelation. It is based upon rather the statements of the companions who witnessed revelation. So when the companions, like Aisha says, radiyallahu anha, Baqarah and Nisa were only revealed after I moved in with the Prophet ﷺ. Umar says this verse was revealed in the farewell Hajj. Someone else says it was at this place or at this time. They are the ones who understand this. If we have narrations from them. If not, then we go to the Tabi'een and we take it from them. Number 4, someone other than Uwais. Don't hug the limelight. Give other people a chance. Okay, Uwais. No one else is speaking.
Generally, the whole surah is Makki Madani unless there's specific evidence otherwise.
Okay, so the general ruling is that a surah, all of it is Makki, all of it is Madani, and there is no exception unless we have an authentic narration stating that it is an exception. Right? Like surah? Like in Surah Hud, that example that we gave, Sahih Bukhari, and so on, yeah.
A Madani verse abrogates what was revealed before it, whether that be Makki or Madani.
Okay, so number 5. The Madani verse abrogates Makki, and the Madani verse abrogates what was revealed before it in Makki as well.
Number 6 is what was revealed from the Madani surahs must be understood in light of the Makki surahs and vice versa.
To keep the Quran together and understand it in context. So the Madani is understood in light of the Makki, the Madani with the Madani, the Makki with the Makki. And number 7, finally,
A surah may continue to be revealed whilst another surah is being revealed.
a surah may continue to be revealed, and whilst it is being revealed, another surah may also start to be revealed. Right? So it's not the case that a whole surah had to finish in terms of revelation before the following surah began. Right? And so those are 7 principles that inshallah will help you to understand when we speak about Makki and Madani and why there's a difference of opinion and what it is that the scholars are referring to when they speak about Makki and Madani, and why sometimes you have a Makki surah but then a narration may come and say, oh, but that verse was Madani, or vice versa, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. So those are 7 principles, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Any questions regarding that? Yeah.
You mentioned about one surah being revealed and then in between another surah. How did they define that it's a different surah?
Okay, so how do they define, so when a surah is being revealed and another surah is revealed in between, how do they define where that verse goes, in which surah? Right? So the Prophet ﷺ would tell them this. So by ijma' of the scholars, the verses, like we mentioned last week, the verses of the Quran are in order. The difference of opinion, as we discussed last week, is whether the surahs of the Quran, that ordering was given by the Prophet ﷺ or not. Whereas within a surah, the verses of the Quran, the verses of that one surah, by ijma' were given by the Prophet ﷺ. And there are narrations that when the verse would be revealed, the Prophet ﷺ would say to the companions, place this verse in this place, before this one and after this one. And he would tell them its exact location. And obviously that's then done, through reading, through memorization, through the Prophet ﷺ leading the salah and so on, and the companions hearing it and them learning it and studying and memorizing and so on. And that's why we have in the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ read Baqarah, and he read Al Imran, and he read An-Nisa, and they're formatted in that with those names, because we know therefore the Prophet ﷺ placed those verses in those correct places.
Do you know if that was done straight away?
It would be done straight away, yes. So when the Prophet would have that revelation, he would say to the companions, place this here, especially for the scribes, right? Those companions like Ubay ibn Ka'b and Zayd, and those companions would be the memorizers of the Quran, and they would be the scribes, and they would be the ones to relay that to others. Right.
So in their salah, they would always recite in the order that it's currently in.
In terms of verses.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of verses.
And even in terms of then when ayats were taken out.
Yeah, because once it's abrogated, you mean abrogated verses?
No, because I've heard some ayat were part of the
Yeah,
Quran, but
and they were taken out, yeah.
So even then, the Prophet would say to them.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. So then they would, and that's why Jibreel alayhi salam in the final year came and he revised the Quran twice with the Prophet sallam. Right? But obviously, an interesting point therefore is that there were times when the Prophet sallam is reciting Surah Baqarah, it's not yet complete, right? Because obviously it's still being revealed, right? And that's why the correct opinion is that if you're, for example, leading Salah, you don't have to stick to the ordering of the surahs, right? Because the Prophet didn't always do that, right? So for example, if you read in the first rak'ah from Baqarah, from Ali Imran, in the second rak'ah you can read from Baqarah. Even though the Qur'an, like the reciters of the Qur'an don't like that. They say it is better for you to stick to tartib, right? Keep it in order. So if you read from Baqarah, or you read, for example, from Surah Qiyamah, then the next surah in the second verse should be a surah that comes after Qiyamah, not before, right? But the correct opinion is that that's not like it's not a condition. You don't have to do that, right? And so if a person wants to change that order, it is allowed for them to do so. And that's in terms of surahs. Yeah. Anyone else?
No, the narration that speaks for the Prophet he read Surah Baqarah, there's a few long surahs all together in one rakah. Could that be understood then that was the whole entire complete surah, or is it what was revealed at that time?
It's obviously what is revealed at that particular time. So when the Prophet is reciting a certain surah, if that surah has yet to be completed in terms of its revelation, the Prophet is reading what has been revealed up until that date.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not necessarily the full.
No, because if it's not been revealed, then it can't be the full surah. But he's reading what is revealed up until that point. But remember that the majority, like Surah Baqarah is probably like the exception because of how long it is, right? Most of the surahs will be revealed like together, relatively close together. And even with Surah Al-Baqarah, it's only like maybe a handful of verses that are revealed like years and years later.
You know the Sahabi who said he loved Surah Ikhlas and he would recite it all the time? Because I don't think the Prophet, would he recite a surah and then after that surah? So
that's what the narration says.
Then
the narration says that he would read another surah after Fatiha, and then he would always conclude by reciting Surah Ikhlas. So not that he would only read Ikhlas.
Yeah, and then do we say, because we can't say this is specific to that Sahabi, because I know I've read that position as well. Or do we say it's not a practice that should be done all the time? However,
it's not a practice. It is, so therefore, it's the Prophet allowed it, but it's not a practice that should be done all the time because the Prophet never did it himself. And it's not reported from Abu Bakr or Umar or any of the companions that they use that as a sunnah. But it's permissible for someone to do it, or someone to do it sometimes, or
Was there a reason why he did that?
He says because I love. It describes Allah and I love to read it. Right, my love for Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Okay, next week we're here. What time? After Isha.
8:40 next week.
So we're going to like after Isha. So Isha next week is 8:15 inshallah, Jama'ah, and then our class, because Maghrib is getting so early now, it will be after Isha for the next few weeks until the clocks go back towards the end of October, and then it will be after Isha as well, but Isha will move back to about 7 o'clock, so then it'll kind of balance itself out. For the next couple of weeks we're starting 8:40ish. Barakallahu feekum. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.